Holy, Acheron is looking like an absolutely insane unit. This character has hands down the most unique mechanic of any character currently in the game and is able to deal considerable amounts of damage to all enemies on the field. She relies on requiring the team to inflict debuffs onto the enemies to charge her ultimate instead of the traditional energy system. And although she's classified as a Nihility character, she doesn't really have any DOTs or traditional debuffs like other Nihility units. And she is also a crit scaling unit, so definitely an odd one to classify as the Nihility path. Perhaps they did this because if her 5-star Lightcone was on any other path, then it might just work a little bit too well for other characters, so they had to put it into the Nihility path because currently no Nihility characters are crit scaling. Oyo's gotta make their money, I guess. But anyway, let's go ahead and break down her kit. And to best understand how she works, let's first start with her talent because it's what makes her so distinctive. Acheron's talent, atop Rain Leaf, hangs Oneness. When Slashed Dream reaches 9 charges, her ultimate can be activated. Slashed Dream is her unique mechanic that gets 1 point of charge whenever any unit on the team inflicts a debuff onto the enemy target, and this also includes herself. In addition, it will apply 1 stack of Crimson Knot onto the enemy target that was debuffed. If debuffs are applied to multiple enemies, then Crimson Knot is applied to the enemy with the most Crimson Knot stacks. And Slashed Dream can only be incremented by 1 per ability usage. There is an exception to this when it comes to Acheron's own skill that I will go over in that section. After an enemy is defeated or exits the field while Acheron is on the field, Crimson Knot stacks will be transferred to the enemy target with the most Crimson Knot stacks on the field. The need to include this verbiage on this ability is most likely because of mechanics like Svarog's Prison and the Memory Zone boss's unique mechanic. Also, when the ultimate is used, it will reduce the all-type resistance of all enemies by 20% until the end of the ultimate. So this is a very unique mechanic that is exclusive to Acheron. The fact that none of her abilities gives her energy like every other character in the game, and instead you need to generate charges of Slashed Dream or to unleash her ultimate. She relies very heavily on her teammates being able to apply debuffs with any of their ability. So let's go through a list of things that count as debuffs just to kind of refresh our memory. So DOTs, defense reduction, res reduction, attack reduction, speed reduction, weakness break, because that is going to apply a DOT of the element that caused the weakness break, and then also MOC and pure fiction mechanics. Sometimes those mechanics just apply debuffs when a character does something. So you can definitely be sure that when Acheron comes out, there's probably going to be a buff in the MOC and pure fiction that applies a debuff onto all of your character's actions, even if they don't originally have a debuff built into it. This just gives us more options for Acheron teams, at least until that buff rotates out. And now 9 charges may seem like a lot. That's 9 actions that all have to apply a debuff in order to charge Acheron's ultimate. And not all turns can do that, right? Sometimes we gotta heal, or sometimes the debuff just doesn't apply because we don't have enough effect hit rate or because the enemy resistance is too high. Now, all of these things can be mitigated, and it actually seems that Acheron's ultimate may be the fastest charging with the right setup, of course. And we'll talk about this setup later on in the video. Now let's go ahead and move on to her skill, Octobolt Flash. She will gain 1 point of Slashed Dream. It also inflicts 1 stack of Crimson Knot on the single target enemy that you selected, which then also deals lightning damage equal to 160% of Acheron's attack to the target and 60% of her attack to adjacent targets. So this is a blast skill that basically helps to charge her ult. The scaling for this is also at talent level 10. This is a pretty simple skill, but you'll notice that Acheron is only able to give herself 1 point of charge on her Slashed Dreams. Don't fret though, because there are more ways to get more stacks of Slashed Dream. Okay, now let's move on to Acheron's ultimate. This will deal damage to the selected target and then deal AoE damage to the rest of the targets. The selected target will receive 372% of Acheron's attack, and then the rest of the targets will receive 300% of Acheron's attack. And then additionally, as mentioned in the talent, when you use your ultimate, it's going to apply a 20% all-type res reduction to all enemies on the field that will last only during the ultimate. There's also a bunch of mechanics involved with the ultimate that I will go over, but really all you need to understand is that its damage multiplier is 372 for the selected and 300 for AoE, and that it applies an all-type res reduction. So the ultimate is broken down into unleashing 3 Rain Blades and then 1 Stygian Resurge. What Rain Blade does is that it's going to deal lightning damage equal to 24% of Acheron's attack to a single target enemy, and then remove 3 stacks of Crimson Knot from that target. When Crimson Knot is removed, it will then deal 15% of Acheron's attack to all enemies, so this is an AoE attack, and for every stack of Crimson Knot removed, the damage multiplier can get increased up to 60%. So in essence, when Rain Blade hits 3 times, it's going to deal 252% of Acheron's attack to the selected target, and then 180% of Acheron's attack to all of the other targets. And then Stygian Research is pretty simple, it just deals 120% of her attack to all enemies, and then also removes all Crimson Knots. So if we do the math, 252 plus 120 is 372 for the selected target, and then for all other targets, it's 180 plus 120, which gives us that 300% that I mentioned earlier. She also has a trace that will improve her ultimate damage even further, and we'll go over that when we go over the trace section. Now let's go ahead and move on to her technique. Her technique is a pretty good one. It can basically insta-kill any non-elite enemy on the map, so this is going to be really useful for just farming materials in the overworld, and also just speedrunning the simulated universe. But anyways, when you do enter battle with this technique, at the start of each wave, she's going to gain Quadrivalent Ascendance, dealing lightning damage equal to 200% of Acheron's attack to all enemies, and reducing toughness of all of them irrespective of their weakness type. And of course, when weakness does get broken, it will trigger the lightning weakness break effect. Now, what Quadrivalent Ascendance does is pretty important because this mechanic is present in her ultimate as well. But basically, what Quadrivalent Ascendance does is that it allows her ultimate to overflow on her slashed dream charges. So after using the ultimate, Acheron gains 1 point of slashed dream and inflicts 1 stack of Crimson Knot onto a single random enemy. So in essence, after using the ultimate, the amount of charges that she needs is actually 8 instead of 9, just making her rotation that much better. So a very strong technique to be sure. Now let's go over her traces. Her first trace is Thundercore. When the Rain Blade from Acheron's ultimate hits enemy targets with Crimson Knot, her damage increases by 30%, stacking up to 3 times, lasting for 3 turns. So this is a total of 90% extra damage bonus. Additionally, when Stygian Resurge triggers, it will additionally deal damage 6 times, each time dealing 25% of Acheron's attack to a single random enemy, and this is also considered ultimate damage. This synergizes well with her Lightcone, as well as just makes her ultimate that much stronger, and also just applies a ton of weakness break. Now, depending on how Crimson Knot is spread across all of the enemies, this trace can behave as a kind of ramp-up effect, or all at once. If Crimson Knot is spread across multiple enemies, at least 3 enemies, then you get all of your damage bonus on the first instance of Rain Blade, and then your following 2 Rain Blades will get the maximum damage bonus. If Crimson Knot is only applied to 1 enemy, then it's more of a ramping effect. Thankfully, this lasts 3 turns, so subsequent ultimates are very likely to have the full damage bonus. So a very strong trace, and this trace is what makes us want to consider building attack percentage over lightning damage bonus on her planar ornament set. Her second trace is the Abyss. When there are 1 or 2 Nihility characters other than Acheron on the team, the damage dealt by Acheron's abilities, basic attack, skill, and ultimate increases to 150% or 160% of the original damage, respectively. So this multiplier is indeed multiplicative and not additive. So if we go back to her ultimate, her 372% ultimate scaling is now increased to 595. That's for the single target. And then for the AoE targets, it gets bumped up to 480% scaling. So this is a very strong talent, but it does limit our team choices because now we are forced to use 2 Nihility characters in order to maximize Acheron's damage output. However, this is okay because Nihility characters in general apply debuffs to help us charge our ultimate faster. Next up is Red Oni. When the battle starts, immediately gains 5 points of Slashed Dream and applies 5 stacks of Crimson Knot onto a random enemy. When Slashed Dream reaches its upper limit, for every point of Slashed Dream that exceeds the limit of 9, she'll gain 1 stack of Quadrivalent Ascendance, and it increases the maximum stackable count for QA to 3. So not only does this just accelerate her ultimate on the first turn, but it just gives a bunch of quality of life and options for Acheron to use her skill or to have teammates use their abilities before she pops her ultimate. In general, for most characters in the game, in order to be energy efficient, we want to use our ultimate before we use our skill. But since Acheron is able to overflow on Slashed Dream stacks, she's able to use her skill and then her ultimate if she so chooses. There could be situations where you might want to do that, and this just gives us the option to do so. It also gives us the ability to apply any amount of debuffs we want before using the ultimate. For example, Pela's ultimate, or any other defense shredding ultimate that we want to pop. So just a really good trace that gives us a lot of options, and in general is just a really good quality of life trace. So after you ult, and if you see that her Slash Dream count is at 3, then that there is the overflow that you managed to get before popping her ultimate. Now for minor traces, she gets 28% attack, 24% crit damage, and an 8% lightning damage boost. Now Acheron is a character that relies heavily on her signature Lightcone, because if you notice that Acheron herself is only able to give herself 1 stack of Slash Dream, just like her teammates. So she's not giving herself any more points to her ultimate than her teammates can. But with her signature Lightcone, she's able to give herself 2. This is because her Lightcone applies a debuff whenever she attacks enemies. So not only do you get the natural 1 charge of Slash Dream from the skill, but you'll also get 1 because you're applying a debuff onto the enemy. A Lightcone also in general just gives her a lot of crit damage and damage bonus, which in turn makes us want to build attack percentage onto her relics. There's also not very many Nihility Lightcones that are crit scaling, and a lot of them are very dot focused, which Acheron has none of. So in terms of Lightcone options, she's quite limited. So besides her signature Lightcone, in terms of 4 stars, you have Goodnight Sleep Well and Fermata. Goodnight Sleep Well, in general, is just a really good Lightcone, gives you a ton of damage bonus, as long as you have debuffs onto the enemy. But in case you haven't been paying attention, Acheron's whole kit is around attacking enemies that are debuffed. And then Fermata is a great choice if you decide to use Black Swan on the team, because her Arcana will be considered either Shock or Wind Shear, so you'll get that damage bonus. And then Acheron actually has a 3-star option, Loop, if you decide to use Welt. Because what Loop does is that you'll get a damage bonus if you attack enemies that are slowed. So this 3-star option is definitely better than any other 4-star option besides Goodnight Sleep Well and Fermata. And then in terms of 5 stars, there's pretty much no good option beside her signature. Now let's talk relics. Her preferred 4-piece relic set is going to be the new Pioneer set. This will increase the damage dealt to enemies with debuffs by 12%, and again, her kit is centered around this, so you'll definitely be activating the 2-piece set effect. And then the 4-piece set effect will increase crit rate by 4%. Acheron is lacking in crit rate, so this is really good. And then they will deal an extra 8% or 12% increased crit damage to enemies that have at least 2 to 3 debuffs. So this set just is increasing our crit ratio. And also, if the wearer inflicts a debuff onto enemy targets, those effects will increase by 100%. This is another reason why her Lightcone is so essential to her gameplay, because it allows this 4-piece relic set to be activated on her skill. Otherwise, it wouldn't be activated. Her ultimate, though, will always activate the 4-piece set effect, because upon activation, you always get that 20% all-type res reduction. The Sizzling Thunder set is the next best set, but it is clearly a side grade. And then in terms of planar ornaments, there is a new set coming out called the Izumu Gensei and Takama Divine Realm, and that's going to be really good because it increases her attack by 12%, and then also when entering battle, if at least one other ally follows the same path as the wearer, then her crit rate increases by 12%. So again, extra crit rate is good because her kit is lacking in that, and her trace is pretty much the same effect as this, so that means you're just killing 2 birds with 1 stone. The next best set is Inert Salsoto, because her ultimate damage is a very big part of her damage output, and also an extra 8% crit rate is good because she lacks crit rate naturally. Space Sealing Station is the third best, and it's just clearly a side grade. Now, in terms of main stats, like I said, she's kind of lacking in crit rate, so crit rate body is most likely going to be your best bet unless you get really lucky on your substats. And then you want to be running attack boots because relying on your teammates to charge your ultimate is just going to be a lot more reliable. And it's also just, in general, a lot easier to build. Attack boots drop a lot more frequently than speed boots. And then in terms of the planar orb, actually attack percentage is going to be better because she has so much damage boost inside of her kit naturally. Recall that one of her traces gives her 90%. And then if we include the relic set, that's another 12%. And then the 8% from her minor trace, it's just a lot of damage boost. And also if you decide to run Ron May, then that's just even more incentive to run attack orb over lightning damage boost. And then for the rope, attack percentage is going to be your best bet. Alright, now let's talk about team setups. Let's first tackle the Nihility characters that you want to consider using on the team, and recall that we want to use at least 2 in order to maximize her second trace, the Abyss, in order to get that 160% boost to all of her abilities. So for the Nihility characters, there are 4 really standout choices, but this is not to say that you can't use any of the other Nihility characters. Silver Wolf, Black Swan, Pela, and Welt seem to be some of her best teammates. Silver Wolf just applies a ton of debuffs, however her downside is that it's really only single target. Black Swan is a really good one because she has the potential to trigger slash streams outside of her own turn and actually during the enemy's turn because of the way that her Arcana works. At least this is what I am thinking if the interaction between those two abilities behaves how I think it should behave. Since Arcana is able to spread to nearby targets, that should technically count as a debuff and give her an extra stack of slashed dreams. Black Swan also just has defense shred and also a vulnerability multiplier if you pop ultimates during the enemy's turn. And then Pela is really good because she applies a good amount of defense reduction and she generates energy the fastest out of all the other 4-star Nihility characters. She gains extra energy whenever she attacks debuffed enemies. Her max energy cost is also 110, so that's also on the lower side. But of course, depending on the weakness types that you need, the other Nihility characters can work. Luca and Gwenithan and Sampo can work, just, in my opinion, not as well as Black Swan and Silver Wolf. And then Welt. Welt is an interesting choice because he can slow enemies. If you decide to use the 3-star Lightcone because you have no other good options, then he's pretty powerful. Also, the fact that you can slow enemies during their turn to just make them not attack is a good way of keeping your teammates alive. And because we're forced to use so many Nihility characters, Welt can kind of work as a pseudo-sustain. Welt also just has damage vulnerability multipliers, so we'll just increase Acheron's damage output even more. And then next up, there are 2 preservation characters that are very interesting with Acheron. First one is the Fire Trailblazer and Gepard. Now, the reason why preservation characters are interesting is because of the Lightcone trend of the universal market. If the wearer gets attacked, then there is a 100 base chance to burn the enemy, and this is actually going to increase stacks of slash dream for Acheron. Also, in the case of the Fire Trailblazer, taunting is considered a debuff, so that is another way to get charges of slash dream for Acheron. Additionally, taunt means that enemies will be guaranteed to attack the Fire Trailblazer, which means you mitigate the RNG chance of burning with a light cone. Gepard can kind of do this in the same way because he has a higher aggro value than your typical preservation character because he has a passive that increases it, but there is still some chance that he doesn't get attacked. But the idea is the same. Also, Gepard has the chance to freeze enemies, which counts as a debuff. And then, of course, there's just Ron May, who is just generally a really good buffer. A ton of damage bonus. I believe it's around 68% or 62%. But yeah, that's just a ton of extra damage. Also, weakness break efficiency is good because Acheron's ultimate is dealing a lot of toughness damage because it hits multiple times. So a typical team is probably going to look something like Acheron, Black Swan, Pela, and Fire Trailblazer. Or Acheron, Silver Wolf, Black Swan, and Gepard. And if you're really feeling it, you can just replace your sustain with Ron May and hope that you can just kill everything before they kill you. Anyway, that's all that I have for you guys in this video today. Drop a comment down below on what you think about Acheron. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next one.